Hey guys, this is for CC Cycle 2, week 20. We are in our second week of orchestra. And so we're going to be focusing on Beethoven and the Fifth Symphony. So for those of you tutors that are new and you're wondering where I'm getting this information from, if you go to your week 20 in your foundations guide, right there under the hands-on, the fine arts part, you'll see Beethoven Symphony number 5, see page 186. So then when you flip to page 186, you will see, let me flip there really quick. You'll see right here how it says week 20, Beethoven Symphony number 5. So what we do now is we go into our Classical Music for Dummies book, go to page 145, and you'll see Beethoven Symphony number 5. And you'll see this little 4 right here. It's number 4 on your CD. So this just kind of like walks you through the piece, but there's other parts of the book that you can use as well. So what I like to do with my lessons is I like to start off with a little bit about the time period. So I say, you know, that we're gonna be looking at this piece from Beethoven, and we are in the classical period. And I kind of ask them, like I remind them, it's from the mid 1700s to the early 1800s. And I kind of see if we can pull in some other things that were maybe going on in this time period, you know, signing the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War, anything from our timeline too, that they would be able to pull and piece together so they have this whole puzzle put together of like what time period we are talking about. Then I move on to the composer. And so there is a little bit about on page 34 about Beethoven. Check right now. So on page 34, you have this little bit about Beethoven. You can also, of course, Google YouTube videos, things like that. Just pick a few pieces of information. It doesn't have to be a lot, because we're going to go through this piece a couple of times. And so you don't really have a lot of time. The first movement that we're listening to, it's 7 minutes. So listening to that twice is already 14 minutes, and that's without the commentary. And so it really fills up a lot of your time. So just quickly, we introduce the time period, it's the classical period. Then just give a few facts about Beethoven. He was born in Germany. His father was very, very pushing him very, very hard into being a musician. Later moved to Vienna, which is, I feel like, modern day times for Nashville for people that want to become singers and songwriters and stuff. So born in Germany. So and let's see what else. His early 30s is when he started to lose his hearing. And so because of that hearing loss, he started to become like frustrated and sad. And that's actually what kind of pushed us into the Romantic period, because his work started to become a little more like emotional. So anyway, so a few facts about the time period, a few facts about the composer, and then we move right into this piece. So this is symphony number 5 out of 9. He wrote 9 symphonies, and before I skip to that part, let me go back. That part about Beethoven, if you go a few pages in, page 38, it has some more of Beethoven's pieces right here. And so if you are trying to encourage moms to do more listening at home, because you're only getting 30 minutes to kind of introduce this piece and this composer, they can read up more on the composer at home, and they can listen to those pieces. You can send them an email if you would like. So they gave you a little list there of some other pieces that Beethoven did. So like I said, we're listening to symphony number 5. He wrote 9 symphonies, and we're going to listen to the first movement. There were 3 movements, or sections, if you want to call them sections. And so the whole thing, symphony number 5, is like 40 minutes, I think. And so what's on the CD that we're covering today is the first movement, and that's about like 7 minutes. So with this first movement, it is in sonata form. It's not just a sonata, like you would say, like, oh, the moonlight sonata or whatever. It is in sonata form. So that means there's 3 sections to that. There's the exposition, development, and the recapitulation. So maybe an easier, more relatable way to look at this would be to say, like, it's like an essay where you have the introduction. So we're introducing our topics. And then in development, we're still talking about those topics, but we're just going to go into like more meat, more detail with that. And then for the recapitulation, if you look at the word, just think recap. We're just recapping. It's like the conclusion. We're just going to kind of wrap the whole thing up. So in the beginning, in the exposition, you will hear two themes or melodies introduced. And I put lyrics to those. And the reason I put lyrics to those, and I will talk more about that later in the video, is because when you put lyrics to that, it helps the students identify them more later when it's coming up later in the song. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to get some pictures of some of these too to help you guys out. In the foundations guide, I'll go to the pictures because that's all I really have right here within reach. We're going to hear a lot of these strings right here. We hear a lot of those. Some horns. These are more modern, like this French horn right here. This is more modern. But back in Beethoven's time, they had older, more simple horns. And so they could only really play a few notes. They couldn't really do a whole lot. So then you'll see Beethoven overcomes that, as most composers do, and substitutes a bassoon. This is the bassoon right here. I'll talk more about that later. We're going to hear some clarinets and flutes, but we also hear an oboe solo. That'll be in there too. So I'll keep these pictures close by. I hope that helps. That was page 115 in the foundations guide. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So when we start off with this movement, we're going to hear the famous, you've probably all heard this piece, bum, 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 bum. The lyrics that I gave to this one is Beethoven's Fifth. You really could pick any lyrics that you want, that whatever it sounds like to you. I chose these words because then they can, if they ever hear this later, then they'll be able to recognize, oh yeah, that was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So that's why I chose those words. I will go ahead and get started. We're going to hear a lot of strings and the orchestra coming in, and it's going to introduce this this melody. And so remember, we're going to hear the exposition first. So we're going to have two melodies introduced. Then we're going to hear the development portion. So we're still going to hear those two melodies, but it's going to sound a little bit different. And then we're going to hear the recap, conclusion, the recapitulation. Well, and there is a little tail at the end too called coda. Coda is just Italian for tail, so it's like a little bit extra that they put on there at the end. So I will go ahead and start. What I do in classes, like I said, introduce the time period, a little bit about the composer, a little bit about this piece, and then I am going to play this through. I'm going to keep pausing it and talking about all of this. And then after I do that, after we've gone through the whole thing, I'm just going to let them get comfortable, whether it's like closing their eyes, laying down, leaning back, whatever it is that's comfortable for them. And I'm just going to play it and I'm not going to talk. You could switch the order and just let them listen to it and then talk about it. But the reason I do this first is because that way when they're listening to it on their own, they might pick up on some of these things that I had just talked about. So that's up to you, whatever you want to do. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with this exposition. They're going to introduce, so the first thing you're going to hear is Beethoven's Fifth. Beethoven's Fifth. There's some strings that we hear here. You're going to keep hearing that, where it's just holding out that note. So you'll hear the strings do that, but later it'll be a different instrument. We'll go over that. Okay, so we're about to hear the horns come in and introduce the new theme, melody, whatever you want to call it. So we'll listen to that now. We're going to hear those horns. So the lyrics I gave for this theme is, this is the first movement, this is the first movement. That way, when they hear this song, they're going to know this is Beethoven's fifth and this is the first movement. So it makes it really, really easy for them to identify later if they ever hear this outside of class. So we're going to listen to some instruments, keep doing that lyrical theme there. This is the first movement. Okay, so that ended the exposition, but not really, because they're going to go to the beginning and play the entire thing again. So we're going to still hear the exposition again. It's going to reiterate these themes. And so they're literally just going to go right back to the beginning and play the whole exposition again. So all of this should sound familiar. Beethoven's Fifth. Beethoven's Fifth. Note from the strings. When we hear the volume going up like that, almost like someone's just cranking it on the stereo and it's getting louder and louder, we call that a crescendo in music. And so this can easily tie back with what we learned in tin whistle about dynamics, going from maybe piano to, well, I'll start at the beginning, pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo. So you can also bring back the dynamics from tin whistle. And pretty soon we're going to hear about maybe 10 more seconds. We're going to hear the horns again. By the way, a lot of moms, our tutors will write me and say, like, it's so hard. Like, these pieces are I'm not familiar with these pieces and it's kind of hard for me. I say to them, listen to it. If you're preparing for this week and you're going to go to your CC day and give this lesson, listen to it all the time. Listen to it in the car when you're brushing your teeth. You will get familiar with it and your brain kind of starts to know what is coming next. So pretty soon we're going to hear the horns again to introduce the second melody. It's the horns. This is the first movement. Here we hear another build right here, crescendo. We're going to get louder and louder. Okay, so that was the expedition. That was our introduction here. We have introduced the two melodies that we are going to hear through the rest of this movement. So now that we're done with the exposition, next comes the development. So you will still hear those two themes, but it's going to sound a little bit different. They're going to have some fun with it. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take a listen. We're going to have another crescendo right here. The volume's going to keep building and building. So now we're going to hear like a lot of back and forth, almost like a debate maybe is what the instruments are having. You're going to hear some horns and woodwinds and then the strings, and then the horns and woodwinds and the strings. But then also notice too, they're slowly taking out instruments and making it softer. It gets a little softer. And then we're going to have some jumping around, like almost to piano to forte, to piano to forte. So a lot of volume jumping around right here. But yeah, you'll hear when I play it again, some horns and woodwinds as a group, and the strings will, and then it slowly dwindles down, like this battering back and forth slowly dwindles down. It's gonna get loud again. So now we're at the recapitulation. So we're going to recap. We are on the conclusion to our essay, if you will. So we've introduced the melodies, we've played around with the melodies a little bit, and now we're going to recap, start pulling. I mean, we still have a few more minutes until it's at the very end, but we're going to start getting into our conclusion. So we're hearing melody number 1 again, Beethoven's Fifth. Right here, we're used to hearing this long drawn out note from the exposition that were strings before, and now it's going to be an oboe. So this is an oboe. I showed you, it looks like a clarinet. This one right here. It looks a lot like the clarinet. Sounds similar to the clarinet, but it sounds a little different. And so the oboe is going to have a little cadenza right here. That's another Italian word. This is just a little solo. Back in Beethoven's time, it was really cool because the musician would make it up on the spot, but it would still fit into the theme that the composer wrote. So that's really cool. But usually today, if you go see an orchestra and they have a little solo, it's usually, not always, but usually it's already written out and they've practiced that. They're not going to make that up on the spot. So this is the oboe's little cadenza, little solo, and then we'll get back into the theme. So when we heard this back in the exposition, when we heard this part, we got ready for the horns to come in. And so, again, back in Beethoven's time, the horns could not play different keys and a bunch of different notes. So what he had to do, instead of using the horns again for this next part, he used the bassoon, which I showed you. This one right here. You play into this part and it goes down, back up this way. So instead of hearing the horns, it'll be the bassoon instead. So same notes pretty much, but it's the bassoon. So you should have heard a little bit of a difference from the beginning in the exposition. This is the first movement. So a little bit between the strings doing it and some flutes that we hear. this is a crescendo. Remember, if you feel like they're turning the stereo up and it's getting louder, again, that's a crescendo. So no, it's not over. So the recapitulation is over now. And now we're going to have what's called the coda, the tail. And so they're just going to play a little bit more. Sometimes the coda is like a few measures, and sometimes it's really, really long. Usually it's written on their music, like where to go back and to play at. But anyway, I don't want to get into that because I know you guys aren't trying to major in music here. You're just trying to get through your foundations lesson. But so the coda is going to play now, and that is tail in Italian. So here's the coda. So we're about to, it's going to start descending. Remember in tin whistle, we had the ascending scale and the descending scale. So it's going to sound almost like it's like going down the stairs or going down a hill. So you'll hear the descent right here. One of my favorite parts right here is that you can hear the percussion more predominantly than you could before. So you can really hear the percussion coming in now. So wonderful. Okay, so that was the first movement, and they can be encouraged to listen to the rest of it at home. But again, like that's 40 minutes. So after I go through and I pause it and I do my little commentary, there's also too, I didn't really touch on a lot of it. I guess I kind of summarized some of it. But on page 145, when you're listening to Beethoven's the symphony, they have like a little timestamp here. What's going on for each one. You can use this too if it doesn't confuse you. And so what I do after this for my lesson is I just have them get comfortable, the lights are on or off, and just have them just sit quietly and listen to it. I know some people are, you know, they kind of like want to do activities or something like that to keep their hands busy for the little ones, but I do not do that. Cece did say in the book that you could have them draw or like color, maybe if you wanted to do that. But I just have them sit quietly and listen, and hopefully they hear some of the things that I had pointed out. And that's pretty much it. That's the whole lesson. I hope that this made sense to you and helped you. And so if you have any questions, let me know. And that's it.